Thank you. I thank you for this opportunity, and I have to let you know that I'm very nervous. I've been very quiet, just trying to think what I will tell you. Sometimes when a story is too long, it's a bit difficult to know where to start and how to tell everything in a very short time. But I will try. I will not say anything about cooking because I'm not a good cook. But I'm good at producing food, they say. So when I first got the invitation to come here, and they said, oh, we're going to have this mad symposium. We've had the first one last year, and the title this year is Appetite. The first thing that came to my mind was hunger. And I'm like, why do I have to talk appetite when I have not known anything about appetite? I remember the first time I heard the word appetite was when I was around 5, 6 years old. And that was connected to my mother, who was sick, and she has lost her appetite. She could not eat anymore. The next thing, she could not move, and the next thing, she was gone. And remembering that and knowing that this is what I have to talk about, I have this connection of appetite as something that gives life when one has it, but it takes life out of you when you lose it. And then from that, I kind of said, well, I will find what gave me appetite, and that's what I will talk about. I was invited to talk about my story, which is what we're going to start talking about now. So I will tell you about how I've experienced appetite. It's in a different way, of course. So, my mother's sisters would come out of the hut where my mother was, and they will say, she's lost her appetite, or she's not moving anymore, or she's not talking anymore. I got scared of her. I couldn't go and watch her, so I stayed away, and I just heard about these things. The next thing, there was me and my little brother. And there we are. That was it. I hate people who cry. So, when my mother passed away when I was 7, what came to my mind was that she gave up. I was mad. And then I said I was going to prove to her sorry.
It's okay. You're beautiful.
We love you.
Thank you. Excuse me. I was going to prove to her that I will not give up. The only way I could do that was by taking care of my brother and myself. I thought I was over this. But yeah. So, at 7 years old, I was the mother to my brother, and I had a grandmother. I don't have her pictures now, but she was an amazing woman. She was about 115 when she passed 2 years ago. She was old, and she was a special woman. So, at 9 years old, I came out of school because I could not afford to go to school, come back home work, fetch firewood, and do everything that needed to be done around the house. I could not stand watching my grandmother and my little brother go to bed without food. So I started working in people's fields, digging and doing whatever needed to be done so I can have food. Then, when I was 11, a cousin sister of mine came to me and said, "We noticed that you're struggling. We would like to help you. We want you to come to our house on Thursday. We have a friend who's 39, 40 years old. He has a blue car, and his sisters go to South Africa. They buy and sell clothes. This guy has been struggling to find someone to marry, and we want you to marry this guy so your life can be better." And sitting there, thinking that was the only option that I had, and knowing that maybe they were right, they were the elder ones, they knew better than I did. Thursday came, and I didn't go to see this 40-year-old with a blue car. I told myself I wanted something more. I didn't know what more was, but there was a voice from somewhere within me that told me that things can change. And that is what I've learned to relate to as appetite. Appetite comes from a special place within us. It's the place where strands of hope are starting to arise, where you can see a little bit more than what is in this moment. So I refused, and then my sister came to me and said, "Well, we offered you all the help that we could give. From now on, you're on your own. We cannot help you." So I was there on my own, and then I had the opportunity to learn about mushrooms. I was trained at 11 years old at some university for a week. I learned to grow mushrooms. I took that back to my village. I could produce food, and I started feeding my brother. And he looked better. He was much worse than he is now. He looks in this picture. This is the village where I grew up, and this is where I started growing mushrooms. As you can see around, we have a little bit of farming going on, and most of the times, we all had lots of waste and very little food, and sometimes nothing at all for people like me who didn't have any access to fertilizers, and I was the only one working. My grandmother was old, my little brother was little. When I grew mushrooms, I found joy in more than just feeding myself and feeding my brother. I was able to feed other children, and that was the beginning of it all. I was able to reach out to other children through mushroom farming, and that is what gave me hope that things can be better. I started growing mushrooms and selling them, sending children to school and training other orphans, because it's something that I decided when I was 8 years old. I said I would help other orphans by teaching them skills, so they will not go through the same abuse that I had to go through as a kid. At the age of 20, everything from my past kind of caught up with me, and I had to deal with it. Then I wrote The Future of Hope. And this was just me telling my story, where I've been a little bit from a point where it's just all a little girl telling a story. 2007, I founded Orphans Teaching Orphans. This is a project that was coming from, looking back at where I have been before and saying, what use is it for orphans to be sitting there waiting for someone to come and save them? What if they can stand up for themselves? We're living in an age where we all have to learn to take responsibility, and that's something that I had to learn when I was 7. And responsibility comes when you have the ability to be aware of what's around you. And appetite is a call to awareness. In this age now, we all have to listen from that place where this appetite is arising. And from that appetite, we have to find a way of responding to that in a responsible way that goes beyond just the temporary urge, the temporary desire that we have for something, but to make it something permanent. And so this is what I wanted to do, to start a chain where often girls are standing for each other and boys as well. So I started working at an orphanage. And for me, this was really, it was going through different stages. I started with something very small, like just my brother as one person, and it's extending to more and more people that really need it. And I have worked at the orphanage looking at the so when I was little, I used to wish I could be in an orphanage. I thought if I was in an orphanage, my life would be completely different. And so when I had the first opportunity to go and work, I went there. And one of the very, very important things that I learned was using what is locally available and trying to relate that to appetite. Appetite is very specific for each individual. It's something that we feel in different ways. And one of the very important things is to be able to really look inwards and find what you have from inwards and bring it outside. In the same way as a community, one of the walls that a community has, or one of the strengths, is to be able to find a way of making change starting with what you have. I lived in a community where everything that people had was waste. And looking at it, you would think it will not amount to anything, but that's exactly what I took, and I used that to change my life and to reach out to other people. And another thing that I learned during the time when I was in my village and I didn't know how to change my situation was to use my hands to do whatever I can do. And in the orphanage, the very surprising thing was we would wake up in the morning. It was a Christian organization. The kids would line up and they prayed and they said, "God bless us with vegetables." It was a moment that I said to myself, I am so, so glad I did not go to an orphanage when I was little. I never learned to pray for vegetables. And I learned to do things with my own hands to get vegetables. But I also kind of had this interest in learning something new. I got to the orphanage, the kids had no bedding, and in 2 weeks we made all the bedding for the 150 kids that we had, just using 2 machines, and all the kids were a part of it. Beyond working with orphans, I also work with women in different communities around Africa and just around the world. And this is a project in Ghana where we're teaching women who are farmers and they don't have enough food and they have to use the waste material from their other farming activities to produce mushrooms. This is in India, where women who didn't even know how to write their names, when I taught them to produce mushrooms, they said, "Mushroom farming is much easier than tending to a veggie garden." That was very surprising. One of the very interesting things is that regardless of the hard times that we've been through in Zim lately, we used to be the best coffee producers. We used to be among some of the best coffee producers. And through the mushroom farming, we looked around at the coffee production process. Given that we have big plantations of coffee in Zim, what we found was that the waste of the coffee from the farm until the coffee that we're drinking outside, only 0.02% is what we're ingesting. The rest of the coffee is waste material. And so we started using that to grow mushrooms. So on the farm, we took the coffee pulp and the coffee husks and we grew mushrooms from that. And one of the things that we did was to actually, how do we fund the training of the women on the coffee farms? They cannot pay for the training, and most of the times the farmers themselves cannot don't have enough money from it to pay for the training. So we created the Chido's blend, which was a combination of coffee from Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and other places. And through this, we were able to reach out to these women. And then we went into the inner city, looking at how we can also use the rest of the waste material that goes to that is exported in different parts of the world. And this was in the United States, where we trained young entrepreneurs to use the waste of the coffee from the coffee shops to grow mushrooms. And now it's become a very big business. And then in Germany, we founded Chido's Mushrooms, where we're also producing mushrooms using coffee grounds. Through all of this, I continue to find that which pushes me to do what I do, and that is what I've decided to call my appetite, that which makes me want to keep looking for something more. And not like what my sisters presented to me when I was 11 to say, either you marry this guy or you spend your whole life sitting here and not amount to anything. It's a little bit more for me, I will do this and then I will do that. For me, it's a little bit of a continuous process. And of course, like with appetite, every time it changes, every time it's something different. It's sensing what is outside. Like I say, my first slide was saying, it lifts the past and it enriches the future. So instead of sitting there and thinking, well, I'm a victim, I will just sit here, I did not marry the guy who could have possibly changed my life, I will amount to nothing, I have this urge, the passion to continue to find something more. And in that same way, I have looked through my work I have done with orphans, and one of the things that I didn't find was a support structure that can maintain that the trained orphans can go forward doing what they're doing. And right now, I'm in the process of registering what I'm calling the Future of Hope, which will be an international foundation that will be setting up centers around Africa, and maybe one day it will be more than just in Africa, where we're working with orphans, teaching them how to find that which they can call appetite and how they can nurture it so they can change both the past and the future. I believe in appetite as something that is more than just wanting food. Appetite is a call to awareness and to taking responsibility. And taking responsibility is also looking at, well, I am not a chef, but some of you are. When I am nurturing appetite, when a customer comes and I have to give them something, how do I then act responsibly to make sure that I give them what they want, but I'm also responsible enough to take care of the environment? The reason why mushrooms are so special to me is also because while I want to give people food, I don't want to forget that we have an environment that needs taking care of. And so mushrooms for me are very special in the sense that it's waste material that most poor people have and that would otherwise be discarded, but then they're using it to produce food. Some people would say, oh, why not just make compost and grow vegetables? But the beauty of mushrooms is that the time that you spend making compost is about 3 to 6 months to have a really good compost, but in that time, you can grow mushrooms that will compost the waste material at the same time giving you food. And that will be the spent, after getting your mushrooms, you can use the spent to feed animals, to grow earthworms, or to feed directly to the vegetables. So that's a little bit my story about mushrooms. And I will be sharing more about the Future of Hope in the future. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Well, that was an incredible start to the day, an amazing story of courage and hope and strength, and an incredible story of assertiveness, how you asserted yourself on an incredibly difficult background. And I think we now know why Chido's name in Zimbabwean language means passion and desire. And thank you for sharing that. That was just, I think we need another applause for Chido. Thank you. Okay, so who's going to ask the first question of the day? Who will it be? We've got to have questions for Chido. Far left, sorry. Okay, over here. Miles has got a question.
Just like to know what kind of mushrooms you're growing.
I am growing oyster mushrooms, shiitakes, and very soon I will be doing medicinal mushrooms and making extracts, and that's mainly because of working with orphans. Most of them are AIDS orphans, so I need to have a little bit of medicinal mushrooms to go with that.
Okay, any more questions? Question here? Wait for the microphone. Yep, sorry. You know the drill. You know the drill by now.
I just want to know what is the exact process that you that you go through with children when you actually teach them about mushrooms. What do they learn first? How do they learn it? How do they eventually grow? Because a lot of these children don't have much of an education. So could you talk a little bit about the exact process in which you do that?
So firstly, when I started, I'd just gone up to the 6th grade of primary school, and I'd stopped when I was 9. And the way that I learned it was through practical. So I just went there and I was doing it with my hands. And I was lucky because when I was with my grandmother, she used to go with me in the forest before I even knew I would learn about mushrooms. And she would sit there, I would collect mushrooms for her, she would smell them, and she would tell me if they were edible or poisonous. So the best way to learn when they don't have any education like that is through practical. But also one of the things that made me decide to do that was when you've been there, like I have been, you better understand how to approach them. And one of the things is through the sharing of the stories, because some of them came to me and asked me, we've been told, we've been made to believe that we're nothing. Because some of the people like me are abused by their families, and they believe they're nothing. And they said, do you think we could ever amount to something? And I told them my story, and they were just sitting there like that, and at the end they said, well, your story is worse than what we experienced, so it's possible that we could be better. And they say, when we grow up, we want to be Sis Chido, because that's how they refer to me. So there's something about knowing how to connect. This awareness is something really, really important, to be aware of what it is that you represent as a person, and also to be aware of the other and know how to engage. It's a process you have to play around with. There's no fixed way, because kids like that, and some of that is still present in me, we can easily create barriers. We can block everyone, and you will just be hanging in there. So it's about knowing that and just playing around it and seeing how you can go.
Okay, any more questions for Chido? Any more? No?
No.
No? Yes, one more, okay.
I was just wondering, are mushroom a big part of the African cuisine, like in Tanzania? Or is it something that's introduced?
So cultivated mushrooms are not, but like I told you, my grandmother, who was about 115 2 years ago, used to go in the forest with me, and we harvested mushrooms. It was the time of the year we would have the most food with my grandmother. So it is a part of, but it's forgotten, because in the name of development, we're leaving some of these things behind, and we're chasing that which is not easily available in our boundaries, and that's the reason why we're a little bit all over the place.
Okay, unless there's another pressing question. Yes, one more, last question.
I was wondering if you also teach the kids how to prepare the mushrooms.
We try to cook, and I'm not the best cook, but yeah, we cook them together, and we just experiment with it. And I'm hoping one of you will say, we'll teach you to cook.